I grew up in the carefree Cave Creek area of Arizona, back when the desert was still wild and open, long before all the new houses and paved roads came in. It was the mid-'80s, the days of my misspent youth, as I like to call them, when life was simpler, wilder, and nights seemed to last forever. That evening, I was heading home after hanging out with my friends, feeling the warm desert air through my open window. On my way, I decided to take a little detour, a wash that cut through the desert not far from Pima Road, just south of Cave Creek Road. It was a familiar shortcut, one that led almost straight to my neighborhood. Back then, the local sheriffs had an unspoken understanding with the locals. If you'd had a few drinks, as long as you stayed off the main roads, you were fine. It was the desert, after all. I eased my old 4WD into the wash, the tires crunching over gravel and sand, and parked in a quiet spot, surrounded by creosote bushes and saguaros. The night sky was clear, the stars scattered thick above me like glitter on black velvet. I turned on the stereo, dropped the tailgate, and grabbed a cold beer from the cooler. The familiar hiss of the can opening felt comforting. I took a deep breath of the cool desert air and leaned back, letting the music mix with the soft hum of crickets and the occasional call of a nightbird. Usually, I'm the kind of guy who respects the desert, never left trash behind, never made a mess. But that night, for reasons I can't explain, I didn't care much. I finished my beer and casually tossed the empty can off into the dark wash. The metallic clatter echoed and faded away. I cracked open another, sat back again, and did the same thing. After my third one, something strange happened. Out of the darkness, one of the cans I'd thrown earlier came flying back. It landed right at my feet with a sharp, hollow thud. I froze for a second, blinking into the darkness. My first thought was that one of my buddies had spotted my truck from the nearby houses and decided to mess with me. It wasn't unusual. We used to pull pranks on each other like that all the time. I chuckled, shook my head, opened another beer, and waited. Not 10 seconds later, another can I'd tossed earlier came skidding across the sand and stopped beside my boot. I frowned this time, grabbed my flashlight from the truck, and shined it in the direction it had come from. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing only thorny bushes, rocks, and pale desert sand. No movement, no footprints, nothing. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I was just seeing things or that the wind had rolled it somehow. But deep down, I felt a strange unease creeping in. Still, I tried to ignore it, downed another beer, and decided to toss that one too. Before I could even move, a Coke can, one that had been lying somewhere near where I'd seen the others land, suddenly shot out from behind a bush and rolled right up to me. This time, I didn't laugh. My pulse started racing. The flashlight was already in my hand, and I whipped it toward the sound. Again, nothing. The desert was silent, still, too still. Something cold crawled down my spine. My throat went dry. I raised my voice and called out, half angry, half afraid. "All right, you want me to pick these up?" For a second, everything was quiet. Then, right before my eyes, another can, the same one I'd been staring at with my flashlight, lifted from behind a bush and flew straight into the back of my truck with a loud metallic bang. There was no mistaking it this time. Someone or something had thrown it. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I scooped up the cans lying around my feet, jumped into the driver's seat, and gunned the engine. My tires spun in the sand, throwing dust and pebbles everywhere as I tore up the wash, racing towards home. The drive that normally took a couple of minutes felt like it was over in seconds. My heart didn't stop pounding until I parked in front of my house. That was the last time I ever took that wash. I never went back. Later, I learned that the spot where I had parked that night wasn't far from the old town cemetery, less than a quarter mile in fact, and just beyond it ran an old cavalry road, one that dated back to the 1800s. People say soldiers used to march through that desert, that men had died along that stretch during skirmishes with the Apache. I don't know what I disturbed that night, whether it was the wind, a ghost, or just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I do know one thing for certain. When the desert decides to throw something back at you, it's best to listen and leave it alone.
It's been 10 long years since that night, And yet, every time I close my eyes, I can still see them. Those two enormous red eyes glowing like molten coals in the darkness of my backyard. Even now, thinking about it makes my heart beat faster and my stomach twist. I was living in Seattle back then, only 26 years old, and the night had started out just like any other. There was nothing to hint at what was about to happen. The rain had stopped earlier that evening, leaving the ground damp and the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and pine. I was leaning against the kitchen counter, talking casually on the phone with my fiancée. It was late, but not too late, the hour of quiet when the city seems to hold its breath. I remember glancing out the kitchen window the way you do when you're only half paying attention, expecting to see nothing but my familiar backyard swallowed in shadows. Instead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. About 25 feet away, framed between the black silhouettes of the trees, were two gigantic, glowing eyes. At first, my mind tried to explain them away. Maybe they were lights from a passing car. Maybe my neighbor had left something strange in their yard. Maybe my tired eyes were playing tricks. But the longer I stared, the less sense it made. These weren't tiny pinpricks of light. Each one was the size of a basketball, bright but not like a flashlight, glowing with a deep, pulsating red, the kind of red you see inside a furnace or when metal has just turned molten. They didn't flicker. They didn't move like a beam. They looked. It was as if the night itself had grown two eyes. Behind the glow there was a mass, a shape that wasn't just black but darker than the darkness around it, a living void towering 6 or 7 feet high. It didn't have clear edges or features, just an outline that seemed to drink up the faint starlight. The air around it felt heavier, thicker. For a moment it seemed to be bent over, its gaze fixed on something on the ground. Then, as I straightened up from the counter, it lifted its head. The eyes rose, locked onto mine, and held me there. Those 3 seconds felt like an eternity. In that moment, it was like something reached out of the dark and pressed a cold hand directly onto my chest. My skin went cold, my stomach lurched, my heart hammered so violently I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I wanted to turn away, to drop the phone, to close the blinds, but I couldn't move. The red wasn't just a color, it was a feeling, a heat that burned through my eyes and into my skull. It felt ancient, deliberate, and aware. Then, without warning, the shape slid to the left, not stepped, not moved, slid. 8 feet in an instant, no sound, no wind, no breaking branches. It was there and then it wasn't. The black mass simply melted into the night, leaving only the swaying trees and wet grass behind. I sucked in a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hands were trembling. Without thinking, I opened the door and let my 2 dogs out, expecting them to bristle, bark, or growl at whatever had been there. But they didn't. They sniffed, wandered, and relieved themselves as if nothing had happened. Somehow, their calm made everything worse. It felt like I had just seen a glimpse of something outside the normal world, something the animals either couldn't sense or had learned to ignore. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just car lights, maybe a trick of the shadows. But when I walked to the living room and checked the front window, the blinds were closed tight. There had been no headlights, no passing car, no obvious source of the light. The realization made my stomach twist tighter, like a knot cinching itself closed. Still shaken, I asked my sister-in-law if she had seen anything unusual, any strange lights, any red glow. She said no. Her answer was casual, almost dismissive, and for a moment I wondered if I'd completely lost my mind. But then, just as I turned back to the kitchen window, that wide black rectangle staring out into the yard, my brother walked into the room. He looked at me, puzzled, and asked, "What's up?" Before I could answer, he frowned and said, "What was that?" He went on to describe seeing something red outside in the backyard, like a flashing strobe light. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. I hadn't told him anything about what I had seen, but here he was describing it back to me in his own words. That meant whatever it was hadn't just been a hallucination, hadn't been a trick of my tired mind. It had been real enough for him to see it too, real enough to show itself a second time. And there was something else about it, something harder to explain. It wasn't only black, it was like a cutout in reality itself, a hole where nothing should be, surrounded by the world but not part of it. The longer I think back on it, the more it feels like I'd glimpsed something I wasn't meant to see. That was the worst part, the sense that it chose to look at me and that I wasn't supposed to look back. The nausea hit me again then, harder than before. I remember gripping the edge of the counter, fighting the urge to claw at my own eyes just to stop seeing those glowing red orbs in my head. My brother stood there still, staring towards the window as if to wait for it to return. The house felt smaller, the night heavier, the silence louder. 10 years have passed, and still the memory hasn't faded. I've told myself every story I can think of to explain it away. An animal, a prank, a trick of the light, some weird atmospheric phenomenon, but none of them fit. None of them explain those eyes, that void, that feeling. Even now, when I stand in my backyard at night, I catch myself looking into the shadows, wondering if it's still out there. Maybe it was Mothman. Maybe it was something worse. Maybe it was something that doesn't even have a name. All I know is that for 3 seconds, I saw something that shouldn't exist, and in those 3 seconds, it saw me too.